practices. So for loops 1, this says that we're going to start by creating a simple loop that goes through all the items in the provided array called myArray and print them out on the screen inside list items, so li tags, and append them to the provided list. So what they give us is a list of food items here, and they say let list equal document create element unordered list. Then in the code that is provided after that, it's going to declare a variable for section, looking for the section tag here, and then it's going to append our list to that section. So all of this logic that's done gets appended to our list. So the first thing we need to do is start a loop. So we're going to say for, and then our condition, and then our logic. So we want it to start with our initializer here. So we're going to say let I equal 0 with a semicolon. And then we want it to run through the list of values in the array. So we want to have it run only as long as the list is. So we're going to say I less than my array.length. And then we're going to put in our expression here, oops, plus plus. So for every time it runs, it's going to run as long as 0 less than my length array. So as long as we're less than 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 items in the array, it's going to do whatever our logic is here. So it says print them out on the screen inside list items. So ultimately what we're trying to write is our item like this. So there's our li tag. That's the output that we want to end up with here. Yes. So that's our goal for the HTML. So first thing we have to do is create the list item element. So I'm going to copy that syntax here, and I'm going to call this list item with a capital I, and we're going to create the list tag itself. And so we're going to create that each time it loops, and we're going to fill it with the words from the list. So that takes care of the li tags here. Now we need to get the position from the array. So my array I somehow, we need to put that into context. So we're going to say that the text content of list item is equal to this. So we'll say list item dot text content is equal to whatever our value is. So first time it runs at 0, so it's going to say tomatoes. And now we want to take that and append the list item to the list each time it runs, which means it's going to take this finished li tag and add it to the existing list. So we want it to say list dot append child and the list item we just created above. So there's no if-else logic here that is happening. It's simply do this code until you have no more items in the list. So we should be able to save this and then open up a preview over here and get our items in the list. Double check. All these errors are not related to our file, so nothing broken there. And that completes loops 1. So now let's take a look at loops 2. We'll do all 3 of these here. So in loops 2, we want to write a program that, given any particular name, searches an array of objects. So this is a search. So let's see what they give us here. So we've got our section that we're going to put everything in. Got our array here, which is made up of key value pairs. So there's a name and a value, then a number and a value. And you'll notice these are in curly braces here, and we'll talk about those. So go back to here. So once we want to search an array of objects containing names and phone numbers called phone book. That's our array. So the whole thing is square brackets. And then if it finds the name, so notice it says if, so we're going to have an if statement in this one. It outputs the name and phone number into the paragraph, and then exits the loop before it finishes all of its iterations. So as soon as it finds the first match, we want it to stop. So our code that we're going to add here is below the array. I'm going to try and make that a little bit smaller so we can fit more on the screen here. So the name we're looking for is Mustafa. So Mustafa is right here. And then we're saying let I equal 0. So as soon as I see let I equal 0, that gives me the hint that our loop is going to be a do and while loop. So while condition, like that. So we want to search for Mustafa. So I set it up here. If it finds the name, output the name. So in the do section here, we want to say if and the name. So if the name equals name, do this, else, if we need it. I don't know that we will. Yeah. So in order to say this in JavaScript here, we want to say if, in parentheses, the name of each time I go through the loop. So I actually want to say phone book, which is our array here, and each time it loops, I want to say I to get me the actual value for name. So that's how we're going to pull that off. And then inside of our logic for this loop, we need to output the name, plural, so their names, let's see, we'll say persons. Name is the number from our array here. So in order to concatenate that out, I'll put a period at the end to make it a full statement. So this is one where we can probably use the object literals to fill in these blanks. So object literals, they start with a $, and then they wrap the variables or values with curly braces. We could do this all with concatenation, but this is one way to achieve it. So the first thing we're going to do is we want to set the content of the paragraph element to be whatever we're outputting here. So we're going to say para.text content is equal to something like this. So to do those object literals, we're going to use the backticks, and we're going to use a $, for the bracket for the person's name, and then so person's name and their number is something like that. So we want to see Mustafa's name, so let's put in Mustafa here. Mustafa is the name, apostrophe S, number. So we want some text here. So his number is, and then our next object literal here. And we want to finish that with a period and a backtick on the end of that. So now to fill in these blanks for Mustafa and his phone number. But this isn't actually going to work. We need to put in the loop from our iteration and our array in here. So we want the phone book and the iteration for the name. So we want the 0 position there, and then eventually the number. So we're going to say phone book I and the name value. And then for the number, we want to do phone book I to get that first position, but we want the number value out of the array there. So backtick means that we don't have to worry about escaping our apostrophe S, and that gives us Mustafa's number. So I don't think we need an else here. We can just wrap that up. So there's no additional, if that's not his name, do something else. So we do want to put a message in that lets the user know that the name hasn't been found. So use a type of loop that you haven't used in previous question. Okay, well, we're using the do while loop. So when the name hasn't been found, we want to eventually loop through all these and say, well, we couldn't find your name, so sorry. So in the do while, we'll still, in the do side of things, write another if statement. So if I matches the number of items in our phone book, meaning we've gone through the end, -1, because we start counting at a 0, then do something for us here. So that something is going to say name not found. So I'm saying para text content is equal to name not found in phone book. And that with a curly brace. And now we have to add our expression here. So we want it to count up through the list. So we want an I++. That's how we're going to end that part of the loop. And then the while portion of this is going to say while we have names in the list. So we're going to say while I is less than or equal to the phone book length. So let's run through this again. So what we're doing, we've defined the name ahead, so we know we're going to find Mustafa. We can test this in the console, change the name to something else, your own name, to validate it. So if the loop is starting on 0, so phonebook0.name gives us Chris, and so if Chris equals name, do this. So that does not equal name. So then it says if I is exactly the number of times we've gone through the list, -1, so it's going to be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. The loop would be 8 times, so we want to get it down to 7 values. Then we're going to say name not found, and then we're going to add 1. So first time it runs, it's going to be 0. Second time it runs, it's incremented up. So Li Kang is what we check. That's false, so it says name not found. And then while the phone book length is 0, 0 is less than the length of the items in the list, it's going to go all the way up. It's going to stop on Mustafa. But if we change name to a name that's not in the list, we should get name not found every time. So let's save this, a preview. And we get name not found in the phone book. So what's happening with our logic here? So no errors related to our code, at least the code runs. So let's look. So we have our do, and if the phone book I.name is equal to name, then we're going to say backtick phone book I. So it should have found Mustafa at some loop. So it should have Mustafa's number. Oh, I see what happened. We missed an important element here. So in the instructions here, it says if it finds the name and outputs the name, and then it exits the loop. which means we have to put in a break. So if this is true, found the name, we actually want to put our break in here. By not having that, it just loops through and says, oh, I didn't find the name, and then I didn't find the name gets output. And it does that perpetually. So save that. And now we found our stop is number. Start on loops 3. So loops 3, we're going to start off with some variables declared here. So we've got I equal to 500. We've got a paragraph that references the element that we're going to create. And then we have a function that's already created here called isPrime. And this is a function where if you pass it a number, it's going to return either true when the number is a prime number and false when a number is not prime. So if you didn't know what prime numbers are, let's take a look at what the official definitions are here. So prime numbers are over here. So this is a natural number greater than 1 that is not a product of two smaller natural numbers. So a natural number greater than 1 is not prime, is called a composite number. So for example, 5 is prime because the only ways of writing it as a product, meaning our multiplication here, is either 1 times 5 or 5 times 1. So we are looking for a list of prime numbers like we see here in the example. So 2, 3, 5, 7, 11, 13, on up. And so in this assignment, we are going to start counting backwards from 500. So we need to use a loop to go through the numbers 2 through 500. 1 isn't counted as a prime. And we run this function on each number as it loops through. So for each number that isn't prime, we're just going to skip it and go to the next loop and see if the next number is prime. Then for each one that is a prime number, we're going to add it to the paragraph's text content along with some kind of a separated, probably comma separated or something like that. So let's take a look at the HTML that we've got here. We have our let I equals 500. Let me back up over here too. So it says you should use a loop that you have not used in the previous 2 tasks. So if we take a look at loops 1, we used a for loop. Loops 2, we used a do while loop. And we could actually do this in any of these loop variations. I think do while is probably going to be the most simple way to achieve this one. So the reason I say that is with our do while, usually the sign that I would kind of identify with here to tell me it should be a do while loop is where the initializer number is outside of the looping syntax here. So in loops 3, you can see from the example code you download, let I equals 500, and then it says return or add your code here. So that's the only reason I would pick another do while loop at this point. So first things we want to do is set up our structure for the do while. So we're going to say do and our curly braces. I'm going to put in here do this while the criteria below is true. So we're going to say that. And then inside of this do while, we actually want to put our expression here. So we're going to say I minus minus. So we're going to use minus minus because we're counting in reverse. We're going from 500 down to the number 2. And then outside of these curly brackets, we're going to put in our while and our condition like so. So that's the structure of our loop. And so now we have to put in some logic. So if we reread this, it says for each number that isn't prime, continue. For each one that is prime, add to the paragraph. So in effect, these are if statements. So we want to focus on something that we can output. So that's going to be the true side of our if statement. So if we want to write this out, we would write out if is prime, and is prime requires the num variable to be passed. We'll come back to that. So if is prime, and then what happens if true. So we've got that. So let's talk about where we say is prime and the number. So since we already declared I as 500, we're going to start at the higher number and then incrementally loop down until we find the right number. So I can take this function here, and I'm going to put this into my console in the browser. So it's undefined, which means JavaScript's interpreter understood everything I put in here. So now I can say is prime, oops, prime, and I can put in a number. So if I put in 500, it says false. So that means 500 is not prime. So I say is prime, and I'll put in 2. Okay, so 2 is a prime number. So in our range that we're testing here, we should expect to see 2 in the true side of our results here. So now going back to our instructions, so since we're asking for a specific parameter, we can actually just pass I back in to the num placeholder here. So I'm going to say I here. So by declaring is prime and the value, we're just making a statement that assumes that the function exists and the value is going to be true. So this is the same as writing is prime I equal true. But we can just cut that off and just use some shorthand here. So when this is true, it says for each one that's prime, add it to the paragraph text content with a separator. So in order to do that, let's take a look at what we have. So we have para already defined, so it's creating a paragraph element. And so it says add to the text content. So we're going to do para.text content. And we can probably use our text literals here. So we're going to plus equals it, so we don't have to do any concatenations. And we can use the backticks there, and our $sign and curly brackets, and the I value here. And then it said to use some kind of a separator. So we could use a space, we could use a dash, comma space. I think we'll use dashes on this one. So what this is doing is saying take the paragraph that was created here and use the method of text content. So we're targeting the content of that paragraph, and then we're doing the equivalent of a concatenation and assignment at the same time. So that's what plus equals does. That would be the same as saying para.textContent equals, and then adding para.textContent again with our value from the loop. So if prime I is true, meaning it's a prime number, add it to the list. And then we really don't need anything else. There's no else statement here. There's not an opposite of this. It just says skip and go to the next one. So that is what we can do on this. We don't have to output a message or anything like that. So now the last component here is it's going to iterate. So it's going to go from 500 to 499 to 498 all the way down to 2. So in order to target that low end of the range in our while condition, we will want to put in our initializer value and set it so that while I is greater than 1, meaning 2 or more, do all this. So we should be able to test this now in our browser. Take a look. So now we have our list. They're all hyphenated and separated. And if we really want to, we could do a little bit of a test. We could say is prime 499. That's true. We could also have this do a lot of heavy lifting for us. We can take I, which was 500, let's make it 5,000, and now calculates all the prime numbers like so. So if we take a look at this Google result, we should see 2, 3, 5, 7, 11, 13. Down here at the bottom, I've got 2, 3, 5, 7, 11, 13, etc. So that's just kind of an application where we can perform some calculations on the fly and loop through and kind of create some really dynamic content. You could use these values for all sorts of different things. A way to randomize numbers, you could factor in prime and run some kind of loop or calculation to pick a value out of a list. Could be used to pick colors, who knows. So that would be the end of loops 3.